Mad Wild West podcast. Kick your boots off and stay a while, because you're about to hear the stories lost in time from the people that lived and made the Wild West mad. It's time for some headlines in the news in the Mad Wild West Times. Today, we're reading from the Arizona Miner, March 23rd, 1872. Headline reads, The Indians. The situation of settlers around Prescott is now dangerous. The Indians are hovering around the settlements in large numbers, and the military, whose duty it should be to chase them away, so tied up by recent orders from Washington that, eager as the gallant men are to go out against the enemy, they dare not do so, no matter how many crimes the Indians have or may commit. Between Monday and Tuesday of last week, a party of Indian scoundrels visited Williamson Valley, which lies about 25 miles northwest of Prescott, captured and drove off about 12 head of horses and mules belonging to Monsieur Nuget, Zimmerman, and other poor farmers. During the same week, they visited Upper Lynx Creek and robbed Mr. Poland of several animals. Then on Saturday, the 16th, they murdered a Mexican near Camp Verde, the particulars of which the crime are detailed as follows in a letter of March 19th from the citizen of the Rio Verde, which letter was handed us one day this week by Joseph Melvin of this place, who, with other men, had ran the gauntlet between the Verde and this place. Here is the sad and sickening details. On the 16th, a Mexican named Ribes went out hunting, and some Indians, Apache Mojave, no doubt, ran across him and about 1.5 miles above the post and just on the line of the reservation and killed him. They shot him once in the breast, and he ran for his life. But they overhauled him and put the finishing touch by shooting him square in the forehead, after which they stripped him of his clothing and went back to the ranchera, as is their usual custom, unmolested. Not even a single soul went out to look after them. C.C. Bean's employees and Mr. Johnson, the butcher, went out and brought in the body of the murdered man. The Indians are around the post and settlement. A few days since, they tried to run off some stock on the settlement. Mr. Relsons says he saw them. Mr. Melvin says that previous to the time he left Verde, Cracky, the Indian interpreter at the post, had met and conversed with several Apache Mojave Indians who informed him that they intended soon to attack and capture the post. Camp Verde is about 40 miles from Prescott. Here's another headline. It reads, Highway Robbery. From Nevada comes a report of the robbery on the highway near Hamilton of the mail stage, about the latter part of February. The robbers, 4 in number, compelled the driver to deliver up to them Wells Fargo and Company's treasure box, but did not interfere with the passengers. This headline reads, Sheriff Warden. Great credit is due Sheriff Warden and Mr. Bridges and James of Phoenix, Maricopa County for their recent action in finding and killing every one of a party of half-breed Indians from Sonora who a short time previous had murdered citizens of this territory. The departed murderers fought Sheriff Warden's party, who very narrowly escaped being wounded by bullets and knives of the now dead and damned cutthroats from that hell upon earth, Sonora. This next article, the headline is Pima Indians. And I'm going to break this up a little bit. It's pretty long, but says Mr. P.W. Dooner, formerly an editor in this territory, contributes a readable article to the Los Angeles Herald of recent date, subject the Pimas of this territory. The Pimas are a tribe here in Arizona. And we're going to pick it up, just shows the history. I thought this was interesting. And it states about them, it says, but the brightest page in the history of the Pima is that which proclaims its ancestry. The tribe claims to be the latest remaining vestige of the ancient Aztec, and its traditions go to corroborate this statement. It is plain that the Jesuits believe this to be true, but unfortunately they have left no record to throw any light upon the early history of the tribe. in reference that those priests who currently had the best opportunity in knowing is obtained from the university of this opinion among the Mexican inhabitants of the Arizona and Sonora. It has long since ceased to be a question among those people as to the original condition of the Pimas. The tradition, as it now stands, says, "The prince who reigned in Mexico was acknowledged the sovereign throughout all the country, from the Gila River to the ocean, and also in the great valleys beyond the Gila." The name of the prince was Montezuma. When the invaders came from the sea to attack Montezuma, he sent couriers to all parts of his domain, summoning the people to arms and to join him at his capital. On receiving the summons, all the inhabitants of Arizona immediately marched to the south, taking with them their families and property. They arrived there too late. The prince had been already slain and the people subdued. The conquerors commanded them to return to their homes, which they did, but all save a few hundred perished of hunger and fatigue. These settlements in the valley of the Gila, conquerors soon followed them, but they received them hospitably and were accordingly established friends and have been on terms of friendship ever since. Such is the tradition of the Pimas, which may be true or may not, but which is certainly strengthened by the observation of the incidents and circumstances connected with this tribe. There will be no question in the mind of any intelligent observer of the ancient ruins on the Gila, San Pedro, Salt, and other rivers of Arizona, but that there was once a hegra from those scenes by an industrious people. The history of the conquest of Mexico, too, goes to establish the fact that the dominion of the Aztec prince was very extensive, and that orders had gone forth for reinforcements to the various parts of the empire. Even at this day, the name of Montezuma is revered by the Pimas, who have as tenet of their superstition that the prince will come again riding on an eagle, and at such time will issue from the rising sun. When that day shall dawn, the Pimas will once again be the supremacy that was lost at the fall of Montezuma. The white men will fade away and disappear, and the old order of things be restored. In other words, the ancient Aztec, now represented by the Pima nation, will have been awakened from a dream of a few centuries. It is, however, a matter of but little practical importance, was originally a branch of the Aztec Empire, or whether he sprang spontaneously from the soil upon which we find him. It is enough that at present he is a grand certainty as an Indian, and a success as an industrious, progressive Indian. When we take in consideration that the tribe has been afflicted for the past 8 years by the actual presence of a government Indian agent, we are puzzled which most to admire, his submission to outrage for the sake of peace, or his industry and perseverance under such adverse circumstances. There you go. We have the headlines from the Mad Wild West. This episode of the Mad Wild West, it is brought to you by Arizona Stage Line. You have a place to go in the Mad Wild West in Arizona? Use Arizona Stage Line. Regular weekly trips by stage with mail will be made between Prescott, Arizona and San Bernardino, California. Stage leaves Prescott every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, arrives at Wickenburg Sunday morning, La Paz and Edinburgh Monday morning, and San Bernardino Thursday evening. Return stage from San Bernardino leaves Saturday morning at 8 o'clock and arrives in Prescott every Thursday evening. Distance about 400 miles. The fares are reasonable. From Prescott to San Bernardino, $80 in gold. From Prescott to Wickenburg, $20 in gold. From Prescott to Edinburgh, which is the Colorado River, $45 in gold. Packages transport on reasonable terms. James Garnett, owner. For further particular inquiries, agents Allen and White in Prescott and I.H. Levy, San Bernardino. There you go. Nice, easy ride in a cramped, dusty, bouncy stagecoach for 450 miles. It's brought to you by Arizona Stage Lines. Okay, it's time for the main story. Make sure that your horse is well rested, because this is going to be a long ride into the Mad Wild West. This one is named The Massacre at Babbs Ranch and a Kansas woman's remarkable ride. It says, Babbs Ranch, a snug little cabin, marked the extreme limit of the frontier civilization, the march of which, so wonderful in its strides toward the mountains since that date, was then far east of the 98th meridian, and the prairies of the Lone Star State and our own beloved Kansas, a wilderness into whose magic area the footsteps of the hardy pioneer had not yet ventured. Babbs loved the solitude of the grand old motionless ocean around him, and was supremely happy in the society of his little family, consisting of his wife, 3 children, and Mrs. L., the heroine of this sketch, a relation by marriage who had recently become widowed, and who was now making her home temporarily with the Babbs. The cabin was prettily situated near the bank of a small tributary on the river, and was partially surrounded by thick clumps of elders, plum bushes, and other shrubs. It contained only one room, which served as a parlor chamber, kitchen, and dining room, but notwithstanding the multi-use to which it was put, was kept clean through the consistent exertion of the female portion of its inmates. A rude ceiling of small sapling covered with mesquite grass formed the floor of a sort of garret, which was used as a general stowaway, access to which was by means of a rude ladder that rested against the wall of the room below. Early in June 1867, Babb found it necessary to take the trail for one of the little Mexican towns near the foot of the mountains, and was forced to leave the women and children to take care of themselves. This was done with a sense of perfect security. However, for the Indians had apparently entertained friendly relations, and Babb, placing, as many a poor frontiersman had before and since, too much confidence in the humanity of the Comanches, left home with a light heart and flattering belief that his family at least were safe from the murderous knife of the savage. Vain hope! In less than a week after Babb's absence, on the magnificent morning in that beautiful June, Miss Babb espied several horsemen coming over the ridge about a quarter of a mile away, and as they approached, saw with sinking heart they were Comanches. They were in all their hideousness of war paint. 2 of her little ones were innocently playing down in the creek bottom, 100 yards or so from the house, and the first impulse of the mother's heart, of course, was the safety of her darlings. So she ran out and called them with all the love of her soul to come to the house for their lives. She intended to get inside, bar up the door, and stand siege, the little house walls of the building being almost proof against the bullets of the inferior guns in the hands of the Indians in those days. But the children, either not hearing her or recognizing the fact that it was too late, hid in the bushes, and down swept the savages like the wind. In a moment they had found the 2 children out of doors, tied them together with their lariats, and leaving them on the ground, rushed into the house, the door of which had not even been closed, and snatching the baby from its mother's arms, who instinctively essayed to save it, dashed its brains out on the floor. 2 of the savages, enraged perhaps at Miss Babb's resistance, immediately jerked the unfortunate woman across the table and inhumanely cut her throat from ear to ear, putting an end to her life and grief at once. Miss L., who had been upon the first dash of the Indians toward the house, rushed up the ladder into the garret. Seeing the butchery, gave a shriek of horror, upon which the savages dragged her down, and, strange as it may seem, did not kill her, but tying her hand and foot, threw her with the 2 children across her saddles and galloped off north. General Marcy, who gives a description of the woman's fate in one of his border reminiscences, says, in accordance with their usual practice, they traveled rapidly as their horses could carry them for several days and nights, only making occasional short halts to graze their animals and get a little sleep themselves, so that the unfortunate captives necessarily suffered indescribable tortures from harsh treatment, fatigue, and want of sleep and food. Yet they were forced by the savages to continue day after day and night after night for many weary miles toward the, quote, staked plain, crossing en route the Brazos, Wichita, Red, Canadian, and Arkansas rivers, several of which were at swimming stages. The warriors guarded their captives very closely until they had gone so great a distance from the settlements that they imagined it impossible for them to take their escape and find their way home. When they relaxed their vigilance slightly, and they were permitted to walk about a little within short limits of the bivouac, but they were given to understand by unmistakable pantomime that death would be the certain penalty of the first attempt to escape. In spite of this, Miss L, who possessed a firmness of purpose, heroically resolved to seize the first favorable opportunity to get away. And with this resolution in view, she carefully observed the relative speed and powers of endurance of the different horses in the party, and noted the manner in which they were grazed, guarded, and caught. Upon a dark night, after a long and fatiguing day ride, and while the Indians were sleeping soundly, she noiselessly and cautiously crawled away from the bed of her young companions, who were also buried in profound slumber, and going to the pasture ground of the horses, selected the best, leaped upon its back with only a lariat on its neck, and without saddle or bridle, started off quietly at a slow walk in the direction of the North Star, believing this course would lead her to the nearest white inhabitants. As soon as she had gone out of the hearing of the camp without detection or pursuit, she accelerated the speed of her horse into a trot, and then into a gallop, and urged him rapidly forward during the entire night. At dawn the following morning, she rode at the crest of an immense overlooking at a vast area of bold prairie country, where for the first time since leaving the Indians she halted, and turning around, tremblingly cast a rapid glance to the rear, expecting to see the savage bloodhounds in eager pursuit upon her track. But to her great joy and relief, not a single indication of a living object could be discerned within the extended scope of her vision. She breathed more freely now, but still did not feel safe from pursuit, and the total absence of all knowledge of her whereabouts in the midst of the wide expanse of the dreary prairie around her, with the uncertainty of ever again looking upon a friendly face, caused her to realize most vividly her own weakness and entire dependence upon the Almighty. And she raised her thoughts to heaven in fervent supplication. The majesty and sublimity, stupendous works of the great author and creator of the universe, when contrasted with the insignificance of the powers and achievements of a vivified atom of earth modeled into human form, are probably under no circumstances more strikingly exhibited and felt than when one becomes bewildered and lost in the midst of the almost limitless amplitude of our great North American prairies, where not a single footmark or other trace of man's presence or actions can be discovered, and where the solitary wanderer is startled even at the sound of his own voice. The sensation of loneliness and despondency results from an appalling consciousness of being really and absolutely lost, with the realization of the fact that but 2 or 3 of the innumerable different points of direction embraced within the circle of the horizon extricate the bewildered victim from the awful doom of death by starvation, and the entire ignorance as to which these particular directions should be followed, without a single road, trail, tree, brush, or other landmark to guide or direct the effects upon the imagination of this formidable array of disheartening circumstances, can be fully appreciated only by those who have personally subjected to their influence. A faint perception of the intensity of the mental torture experienced by these unfortunate victims may, however, be conjectured from the fact that their senses at such junctures become so completely absorbed and overpowered by the cheerless prospects before them that they oftentimes wander about in a state of temporary lunacy, without the power of exercising the slightest volition of the reasoning faculties. The inflexible spirit of the heroine of this narrative did not, however, succumb in the least to the imminent perils of the situation in which she found herself, and her purposes were carried out with a determination as resolute and unflinching as those of the Israelites in their protracted pilgrimage through the wilderness, and without the guidance of the pillars of fire and a cloud. The aid of the sun and the broad leaves of the pilot plant by day, with the light of the Polaris by night, enabled her to pursue her undeviating course to the north with as much accuracy as she had been guided by the magnetic needle. She continued to urge forward the generous steed she bestrode, who, in obedience to the will of his rider, coursed swiftly on hour after hour during the greater part of the day without the least apparent labor exhaustion. It was a contest for life and liberty that she had undertaken, a struggle in which she resolved to triumph or perish in the effort. And still the brave-hearted woman pushed on until at length her horse began to show signs of exhaustion. And as the shadows of evening began to appear, she became so jaded that it was difficult to coax or force him into a trot, and the poor woman began to entertain serious apprehension that he might soon give out altogether and leave her on foot. At this time, she was herself so much wearied and in want of sleep that she would have given all she possessed to have been allowed to dismount and rest. But unfortunately for her, the wolves, advised by their carnivorous instincts that she and her exhausted horse might soon fall an easy sacrifice to their vicious appetites, followed upon her track and came howling in great numbers around her, so that she dared not set her foot upon the ground. And her only alternative was to continue urging the poor beast to struggle forward during the dark and glooming hours of the long night, until at length she became so exhausted that it was only with the utmost effort of her iron will that she was able to preserve her balance upon the horse. Meantime, the ravenous pack of wolves, becoming more and more emboldened and impatient as the speed of her horse relaxed, approached nearer and nearer, until with their eyes flashing fire, they snipped savagely at the head of the terrified animal, while at the same time they kept up their hideous concert like of howlings of 10,000 fiends from the infernal regions. Every element in her nature was at this fearful juncture taxed to its greatest tension, and impelled her to concentrate the force of all her remaining energies in urging and coaxing forward the wearied horse, until finally he was barely able to reel and struggle along at a slow walk. And when she was about to give up in despair, expecting every moment that would drop down dead under her, the welcome light of day dawned in the eastern horizon, and imparted a more cheerful and encouraging influence over her. And on looking around, to her great joy, there were no wolves in sight. She now, for the first time in about 36 hours, dismounted, and knowing that sleep would soon overpower her, and that the horse, if not secured, might escape or wander away, and there being no tree or other object to which he could be fastened, she, with great presence of mind, tied one end of the long lariat to his neck, and with the other end around her waist, dropped down on the ground into a deep sleep, while the famished horse cropped the herbage around her. She was unconscious as to the duration of her slumber, but it must have been protracted to have compensated the demands of nature for the exhaustion induced by her long ride. The sleep was sweet, and she dreamed of happiness and home, losing all consciousness of her actual situation until she was startled and aroused by the pattering sounds of horses' feet beating the earth on every side. Springing to her feet in the greatest possible alarm, she found herself surrounded by a large band of savages, who commenced dancing around, flaunting their war clubs in frightening proximity to her head, while giving utterance the most diabolical shouts. Her exceedingly weak and debilitated condition at this time, resulting from long absence from food and unprecedented mental and physical trials, had wrought upon her nervous system to such an extent that she imagined the moment of her death had arrived and fainted. The Indians then approached, and after she had recovered, placed her again upon a horse and rode away with her to their camp, which fortunately was not far distant. They turned their prisoner over to the squaws, who gave her food and put her in bed, but it was several days before she was sufficiently able to walk about the camp. She learned that her last captor belonged to Lone Wolf's band of Kiowas. Although these Indians treated her with more kindness than the Comanches had done, yet she did not for an instant entertain the thought that they would voluntarily release her from bondage. Neither had she the remotest conception of her present locality, or the direction or distance to any white settlement, but she had no idea of remaining a slave for life, and resolved to make her escape the first practical moment that offered. During the time she remained with these Indians, a party of men went away to the north. They were absent 6 days, bringing with them on their return some ears of green corn. She knew the prairie tribes never planted a seed of any description, and was therefore confident it was not over 3 days' journey distance to a white settlement which the party had evidently visited. This was encouraging intelligence to her, and she waited the time anxiously when she could depart. Late one night, after all had become hushed throughout the camp, and everything seemed calm for the consummation of her purposes, she stole carefully away from her bed, crept softly out to the herd of horses, and after having caught and subdued one, was in the act of mounting, when a number of dogs rushed out after her, and by their barking created such a disturbance among the Indians that she was forced for a time to forego her designs and crawl hastily back to her lodge. On a subsequent occasion, however, fortune favored her. She secured an excellent horse and rode away in the direction from which she had observed the Indians returning to camp with the green corn. Under the certain guidance of the sun and stars, she was enabled to pursue a direction bearing, and after 3 consecutive days of rapidly riding, anxiety and fatigue, she arrived upon the border of a large river flowing directly across her track. The stream was swollen to the tops of its banks, the water coursing like a torrent through its channels, and she feared the horse might not be able to stem the powerful current. But after surmounting the numerous perils and hardships she had already encountered, the dauntless woman was not to be turned aside from her inflexible purpose by this formidable obstacle, and she instantly dashed into the foaming torrent, and by dint of encouragement and punishment forced her horse through the stream and landed safely upon the opposite bank. After giving her horse a few moments' rest, she again set forward, and had ridden but a short distance when, to her inexpressible astonishment and delight, she struck a broad and well-beaten wagon road, the first and only evidence or trace of civilization she had seen since leaving her home in Texas. Up to this joyful moment, the indomitable inflexibility of purpose of our heroine had not faltered for an instant. Neither had she suffered the slightest despondency in view of the terrible array of disheartening circumstances that had continually confronted her. But when she realized the hopeful prospect for her of a speedy escape from the reach of her barbarous captives, and a reasonable certainty of an early reunion with people of her own sympathizing race, the feminine elements of her nature preponderated. Her stoical fortitude yielded to a delightful anticipation, and her joy was intensified and confirmed by seeing a long train of wagons approaching over the distant prairie. The spectacle overwhelmed her with ecstasy, and she wept tears of joy while offering up sincere and heartfelt thanks to the Almighty for delivering her from a bondage more dreadful than death. She then proceeded on until she met the wagons in charge of Robert Bent, whom she entreated to give her food instantly, and she was in a state of bordering upon absolute starvation. He kindly complied with the request, and after the cravings of her appetite had been satisfied, she desired to gratify his curiosity, which had been not a little excited at the unusual exposition of a beautiful white woman appearing alone in that wild country, riding upon an Indian horse with no covering upon her head save her long natural hair, which was hanging loosely and disorderly about her shoulders, while her attire was sadly in need of repair. Accordingly, he inquired of her where she lived, to which she replied, in Texas. Mr. Bent gave an incredulous shake of his head at this response, remarking that at the same time that he thought she must be mistaken, as Texas happened to be situated some 500 or 600 miles distant. She reiterated the assurance of her statement, and described to him briefly the leading incidents attending her capture and mistake. But still he was inclined to doubt, believing she might possibly be insane. He informed her that the river she had just crossed was the Arkansas, and that she was then on the old Santa Fe Trail, about 15 miles west of Big Turkey Creek, where she would find the most remote frontier house. Then, after thanking him for his kindness, she bade him adieu, and started away in a walk toward the settlement, while he continued his journey in the opposite direction. But he still followed the exit of the remarkable apparition with his eyes until she was several hundred yards distant, when he observed her throw one of her feet over the horse's back, and casting a grateful kiss toward him with her hand, she set off on a gallop and soon disappeared over the crest of the prairie. On the arrival of Bent at Fort Zara, he called upon the Indian agent and reported the circumstances of meeting Mrs. L. And by a singular coincidence, it so happened that the agent was at the very time holding a council with the chief of the identical band of Indians whom she had last escaped, and they had just given a full history of the entire affair, which seemed so improbable to the agent that he was not disposed to credit it until he received its confirmation from Bent. He at once dispatched a man to follow the woman and conduct her to Council Grove, where she was kindly received and remained for some time, hoping through the agents to gain intelligence of the two children she had left with the Comanches, as she desired to take them back to their father in Texas, but no tidings were gained. Meantime, she made the acquaintance of a man at Council Grove, whom it is stated she married, and for aught that it is known may be there yet. Wherever she is, I wish her all possible happiness. It will be readily seen by reference to the map of the country over which Miss L. passed that the distance from the place of her capture to the point where she struck the Arkansas River could not have been short of 500 miles. And the greatest part of this desert plain she traveled alone without seeing a single civilized human habitation. If any other woman in ancient or modern times has performed a signal and equestrian achievement as this, I have yet to learn it. Well, I hope you didn't get worn out by that long ride, but that woman has the power of the Mad Wild West in her, and that's what saved her. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode and the crazy stories. And until the next episode, keep your horses tied up. Thanks for listening. The Mad Wild West Podcast. These are the true stories that made it wild.